Quiet. Order in the court. Tell me why you are so indignant for supporting the cause of evolution.
Big boy! First, let me bring up the major point of the many different and variable theories of evolution. The definition of evolution is a process by which living organisms are thought to have developed and diversified from earlier forms in the history of Earth. Stemming from that belief, many scientists during the Enlightenment period believed that there was more to the belief that humans had stemmed from God's creation. The one of many significant ones was Charles Darwin, indicating that evolution was an extremely slow process that occurred over a long period of time. He believed that a process called natural selection, where essentially those who survive in an environment are more likely to pass on their traits, was a driving factor in evolution. Essentially, it's the only mechanism that causes adaptive evolution, and we've got evidence for it. When Darwin studied finches on the Galapagos Islands, he found that birds from nearby islands had similar structures to those finches on the mainland. Knowing about biogeography, Darwin knew that those finches were the same exact birds from the mainland, except that they had adapted to their new environments and gained new features, including a longer beak. Coincidence? I think not.
Stemming off of Roger's points here, I will talk about the origin of life as it is. The initial speciation of life was created through the proliferation of unicellular and multicellular organisms, leading to many different biological species, which essentially are groups of populations that breed and reproduce viable offspring. And here, I will show you. Following the topic of evolution of unicellular and multicellular life, I like to point out that although our genetic material is DNA, the first ever genetic material was RNA, and here's how. At this time period, catalysts completely made of RNA were needed in very early time periods to complete the synthesis of proteins. However, soon the protein catalysts soon evolved and DNA took over as a more complex source of genetic material, as a more stable material for storing genetic material for. As shown here, evolution is not goal-oriented. Structures evolve through series of incremental modifications.
Well, you see, you kids. Evolution simply is incompatible with the works of God, so therefore it is not valid. The Bible said that all life was created within 7 days.
And that's where you're wrong.
The book of Exodus states,
Shh! I will provide you evidence on the primitive forms of life. In the very initial point of life on Earth, populations of life were dominated by prokaryotic species, or species that lacked nuclei. Rapid reproduction, mutation, and genetic recombination of these organisms promoted genetic diversity in prokaryotes, leading to the very slow process of adaptive evolution. This diversification led to the creation of more complex organisms, including plants and animals, starting in a more simple form called green algae. They have evolved to more complex forms, including mosses, ferns, and gymnosperms or angiosperms. Animals which are now multicellular and heterotrophic creatures where tissues had evolved from single-celled creatures that I mentioned earlier. Also, their body plans were extremely significant to see the process of evolution. While earlier forms of animals didn't include symmetry, like sponges, most modern forms do indeed have bilateral or radial symmetry, including humans.
well, riddle me this. If evolution exists, then why do monkeys still exist?
Well, mister, monkeys and humans are two completely different species. Humans essentially did not evolve from monkeys. Also, evolution never states that a species goes completely extinct after evolving into another species, and that's in the case that humans did evolve from monkeys, which isn't true. Get it now? Anyways, we can also see evolution through the transition of invertebrates into vertebrates, developing characteristics such as a dual embryonic layer, the ectoderm and the endoderm, cephalization in the digestive system. This allowed the transition of these invertebrates into more complex land animals called vertebrates, including, but not limited to, reptiles and mammals.
And that is all for our case, Your Honor. What will the final verdict be?
I think it's all BS. I declare Scopes and his act to teach evolution in class unconstitutional.